Every once in a while, a new technology comes along that feels like it's going to change absolutely everything. And when it does, it sets off this wild, almost euphoric gold rush in the financial markets. Today, we're going to look at all the excitement around AI and ask a simple question. Is this really something new? Or are we just hearing echoes from a market crash that maybe we should have never forgotten?
So, here's the big question we're tackling today. What if this incredible, world-changing excitement around artificial intelligence isn't new at all? What if we've seen this exact movie before, just with a different technology and a whole new cast of characters? So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll dive into the dot-com blueprint. Then, we'll look at the psychology of what makes a bubble in the first place. After that, we'll jump to today's AI gold rush, see if history's warning signs are flashing, and finally, we'll try to untangle that crucial difference between real innovation and pure speculation, because that's what determines who's left standing when the music stops. All right, let's hop in the time machine. To really get what's happening today, we first need to understand the blueprint, the one laid out by the dot-com era, a time of unbelievable optimism that, as we all know, ended in a truly historic collapse. This timeline, it really lays out the whole wild ride. It all started with this tiny little spark back in '93, the Mosaic browser. For the first time, you could see pictures on the web. It sounds so basic now, right? But that was a total game changer. But the real explosion? That was Netscape's IPO in 1995. This was a company that wasn't even reliably profitable, and its stock almost tripled on day one. That sent a shockwave through the markets, basically screaming that the old rules were out the window. By '99, it was just pure mania, a feeding frenzy of IPOs. And then, in 2000, the whole thing came crashing down. And the whole thing was running on this one kind of crazy idea. The thinking went like this. Forget profits, forget revenue, forget any of those old, boring metrics. The only thing that mattered was growth, specifically getting eyeballs. How many people are looking at your website? That was it. So investors weren't really buying a piece of a business anymore. They were just making a bet that someone else, some other person, would be willing to pay more for that same stock tomorrow. It was a giant game of musical chairs. Right in the middle of this whole party, the head of the U.S. Central Bank, Alan Greenspan, came out and used these two famous words, irrational exuberance. It was really just a polite central banker way of saying, hey, everyone, you're all going a little nuts here. But, when everyone around you is getting rich, the last thing you want to hear is that the party's about to end. So, for the most part, people just ignored him. So, how did this massive party finally end? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was like a 1-2-3 punch that cracked the whole foundation. First, you had the Y2K scare, which just created a lot of uncertainty. Then, Greenspan followed through on his worries and started hiking interest rates, making it less attractive to gamble on risky stocks. And the final blow? Japan, which was a huge tech powerhouse, slipped into a recession. That spooked investors everywhere. The confidence that had held this entire house of cards up just evaporated. The damage? Just staggering. We're talking about $1.75 trillion in market value. Gone. And that's not just Wall Street money, that's people's life savings, their retirement accounts, their jobs, all wiped out. And if you want to see what that looks like on a chart, just look at the Nasdaq. It's brutal. The tech-focused exchange peaked at over 5,000 points. Then, over the next 2 years, it just fell off a cliff. It lost almost 80% of its value. Think about that. It would take 15 long years just to get back to where it was in 2000. It was a complete and total bloodbath. Okay, so the what is pretty clear, but the why? Why did this happen? Well, that's where things get really interesting. To get that, you have to look past the charts and into how our brains are wired. At the core of pretty much every single financial bubble, you find this one simple, powerful human emotion: FOMO, fear of missing out. It's that feeling you get when you hear your neighbors making a killing on some stock you've never even heard of. You start to think, man, I'm being left behind. And that feeling, that anxiety, it just short-circuits the rational part of your brain and pushes you to make impulsive decisions. And that FOMO, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It gets supercharged by a few other things. You have herd behavior, our instinct to just follow the crowd because it feels safer, right? Then the media fans the flames with story after story about overnight millionaires. Then venture capital pours gasoline on the fire, which creates this illusion of success that sucks in everyday investors who end up risking everything to get a piece of the action. Which, of course, brings us right back to today. The tech is different, sure, but are we humans acting any differently? let's make the pivot and ask that big question. Is this AI boom just the new .com? It's almost funny, right? The playbook is just so similar. Back then, the magic trick was to add .com to your name. Today, companies are doing the exact same thing, just with a new magic word to get investors excited: AI. You see the same patterns everywhere, a total explosion of money pouring into AI startups. You've got companies scrambling to rebrand themselves as AI companies. We're seeing these astronomical valuations for companies that have a pretty fuzzy path to actually making money. All the attention is focused on market darlings like OpenAI and NVIDIA. Instead of chasing eyeballs, the new metric is, model parameters, access to computing power. The jargon has changed, but the vibe feels exactly the same. So, what's the verdict? Is this just a little déjà vu, or are we literally watching a rerun of the same movie? Let's put these two eras side by side and really look for the warning signs. I mean, when you lay it out side by side like this, it's kind of spooky. The magic suffix went from .com to .ai. The big promise shifted from growth over profit to this grand idea of AGI over profit, chasing some future superintelligence. The market darling went from Netscape to companies like OpenAI and NVIDIA. And the biggest red flag of all, it's exactly the same. Huge, huge valuations for companies with no clear path to actually earning sustainable revenue. All right, let's talk about a concrete example from today, a company called Builder.ai. In just one single day, they raised an absolutely massive amount of money from huge investors like Microsoft and SoftBank, $250 million. So the promise from Builder.ai was incredible. You can build complex apps just by talking to our AI. No code needed. But then reports started coming out, and they alleged that a lot of the work wasn't actually being done by an AI at all, but by teams of human engineers overseas. The company was basically accused of being an AI front, just using the buzzword to get funding, with some even alleging they faked transactions to make their numbers look better. I mean, that story sounds like it was ripped straight out of the .com playbook. Okay, so this all leads to the big takeaway here, the core lesson we need to pull from all this. You have to be able to separate the actual world-changing technology from the crazy speculative bubble that can grow around it. And this is so important to remember. The .com bubble bursting wasn't the death of the internet. Not even close. Sure, all the hype-driven companies, the pets.coms of the world, they got completely wiped out. But the companies built on real innovation, the ones with actual business models like Amazon and Google, they not only survived, they went on to basically define the next 20 years. The crash was like a cleansing fire that cleared out all the noise. And really, it all boils down to this one simple truth. The technology itself is always going to change. It was the internet, now it's AI, tomorrow it'll be something else. But our basic human psychology, our fear, our greed, our instinct to follow the crowd, that stuff doesn't change. It's the same today as it was 100 years ago. So let's leave it with this final thought. The question isn't if AI will change the world. We know it will. That's pretty much a given. The real question is whether our financial markets, which are still driven by that same old human psychology, can handle the hype without driving us all off another cliff. History has given us the map. The final chapter, though, well, that's being written as we speak.